I almost said Backstreet Boys. I meant my back row boys. You guys doing good back there? All right, tell you what, I used to go to church all the time and sit in the back row. If you're starting to feel this, just put your head down. 5 minutes later, you'll feel a lot better, and I won't call you out. Okay? Deal? Is that a deal? All right. Well, it's really nice to be back with you. Last time I was here, it was Christmas time, and we did a Christmas message, and I shared a message entitled The Real Reason for the Season, which was all of us, every single one of you and I, because the Bible talks about that the reason why Jesus came is because of the sins of the people, and I hope that message was helpful for you. This morning, I want to share with you something a little bit kind of very different. Whenever I speak during Christmas time, there's always different messages that are possible, and so I'd like to share with you the other message that I was thinking about sharing with you back then in the Christmas time, and I've entitled it, King Herod and King Jesus. We Christians often don't think about and realize that the scriptures, the Bible, was given to us during a time in actual history. This is not a faith that we have just conjured up out of the blue and just resides in our minds. There's real events, real people, real empires, real buildings, real archaeology that you can do to highlight and illuminate this amazing book that we read. For example, I don't know if you know this particular gentleman right here. His name is Caesar Augustus. And everybody say Augustus.
Augustus.
Now, if you do history work, and take a look at this gentleman and his family line and his history, you'll discover that his name is actually Octavian. He's an adopted son of Julius Caesar, and when he takes the throne as Caesar, he decides, through the historical accounts, to change his name from Octavian, which is his name, to Augustus, which means worshipped one or exalted one. And here at a time when you have a king who's ruling over a land that's now calling himself the worshipped one and the exalted one, you have a guy, a little baby born named Jesus, who eventually rises up to become a worshipped one. This morning I want to share with you some history around this gentleman right here named King Herod. And he's called Herod the Great. And most Christians don't know very much about him other than he killed babies when Jesus was born. Well, I want to share with you a little bit some more insights. We don't have time to share all of the things about King Herod other than three specific things. I'm going to spend a lot of time on the last one, which is the edifices. Number one, when he became king of the Jews, he ruled with fear. Number two, when he was king, who he was as an individual was extremely ego-driven. All about himself. And number three, the way to declare that he is king and you are not. The way to declare that he is all-powerful and you are subject to his rulership is through the buildings, the edifices that he's built. Now, a couple notes on the fear. Not only did King Herod kill babies when Jesus was born, if you read some historical accounts, he also killed his sons. He was afraid that his wife was going to overthrow his throne, so he killed his wife. His brother-in-law was also kind of next in line for the throne, so he has him go down and swim in a swimming pool down in Jericho, and he accidentally has a little bit of a swimming accident, and his brother-in-law drowns in a pool. That was most likely at the hands of King Herod. And then when you read about all these other murderous things that King Herod does, you start to realize, oh, him killing babies when Jesus is born makes a lot of sense because that's who this guy is. At the very end, I'll share with you, so I'll share with you twice because this is kind of the culmination of getting into the brain of Herod. When Herod dies, he is so concerned that people aren't going to honor his death that he commands his soldiers to kill 1,000 prominent Jews on the day of his death so that there would be mourning in the land. This is what's going on with this guy, Herod, during the 1st century BC, right as Jesus is born. Now, the second characteristic, ego, I don't know if you noticed this statue, but if you do some archaeological study and take a look at pictures from the ancient world, you will notice distinctly, and we showed this picture to a bunch of 5th and 6th graders, by the way, and their brilliant question is, why doesn't Herod have a beard? And I don't know if you ever thought about that, but if you take a look at the picture, why doesn't he have a beard? And if you look at Greek statues, they don't have beards. Very clean shaven. But if you look at Jewish art, they all have beards because the scriptures tell you that you're supposed to not cut the corners of your hair. And so this tells you a little bit that Herod, even though he was king of the Jews, was not following Jewish custom at all. He was not following God's law. He was not following God's command. He was not involved in obeying God in the way that the Jewish people were. One of the evidences of that is if you can look on his head, he's got a wreath. And a wreath is a distinctly Greek from an Olympic Games celebratory ornament. In other words, he actually won an Olympic wreath, which is kind of like our modern day gold medal, in throwing the javelin. And so, if you took a look at the two ancient cultures, Greek culture, which was all about me, my power, my pride, my nakedness. Yes. Or, if you take a look at the Jewish culture, Herod is very much, even though he's king of the Jews, is very much bought into the Greek culture. It's all about me. It's all about my power, my pride, my prestige, my authority. And then lastly, the edifices, which is where we're going to spend most of our time this morning. Because what Herod builds to leave a mark on this country, to leave a mark on history, is just fantastic. Let's start at a place called Caesarea Maritima. Now, Caesarea is right there on the sea, and again, these ruins, you can still go there and check out. You can see he built a 4,000-seat stadium right on the coast of the sea. All of this, by the way, covered in Italian marble. Italian marble. Now, if you do your geography really quickly, how far is Italy from Israel? It's a long way. It's several thousand miles. So he imports marble from Italy to cover this magnificent place. You can see a little bit of the close-up of the theater. And can you imagine going to the movies on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea? I mean, this is the part of the grandeur of this beautiful place. He also built a hippodrome. A hippodrome is just simply a horse stadium where they would do all sorts of competitions and things like that. There is archaeological evidence to suggest that there were valve systems that Herod built himself. Excuse me, not himself, his engineers. But that Herod implemented to let ocean water come into this place, and so that they would have hippopotamus fights and shows, and then they would close the valves or have a valve system in which the ocean water would then just flush right back out into the ocean. This guy was ingenious, brilliant in his development. You can see a little bit there. Can you imagine going to a football game or a soccer game or watching Jeremy Lin dunk right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea? I mean, this place is absolutely beautiful, absolutely phenomenal. In addition to that, because Herod is all about himself and pride, prestige, luxury, wealth, opulence, this is a freshwater swimming pool that he builds out into the Mediterranean Ocean. A freshwater swimming pool that he builds out into the Mediterranean Ocean. And if you take a look at artist renditions, it was most likely colonnaded and covered, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. Now, where did he get this water? Well, you have to get this water from somewhere, so you build an aqueduct, our modern day piping system. This aqueduct runs about 13 miles from Caesarea to the foot of Mount Carmel, brings in fresh water. 6 of those miles is underneath the earth through stone. Now, remember, this is back in the 1st century BC. And Herod is building and constructing all of these things. How does he do some of this? Back in the 1st century BC, the engineers of that day had figured out particular ways, specifically with the port there and some of the other buildings, even how to pour concrete underneath the ocean. I mean, over 2,000 years ago, people are learning how to pour concrete underneath the ocean. And Herod takes all this and builds Caesarea as a monument to his power, his glory, his fame, his rulership. Next, we have the temple. And many of you know about the temple. You've seen pictures of it, I'm sure. But you can see, once again, the grandeur and scale. And the only reason why this temple has its massiveness is because of Herod's engineers. You can see a little bit, pardon me, of a modern picture of it today. Right here in the center where the gold dome is, which is the picture that most people see, that's a mosque today. Most archaeologists think it actually was once a church, because if you notice, it's in an octagonal shape. It's in the 8-sided shape. But that's where the temple would have sat. The walls that surround it, all the way to the edge of this photo, is the Temple Mount that Herod built. In other words, the platform that he built. And can you see people there? This thing is massive and huge, built on a mountain. And the engineering that it took, if you take a look at the stones, the embossing into the stones, it's very clearly Herodian. Once again, to display the grandeur. And each particular stone is set into place without any cement, without any adhesive, set there and has been there for 2,000 years. Now, one of the stones that he put in there, archaeologists and engineers marvel at this thing. If you take a look at my sister-in-law here on this side, she's on one side of the stone, our tour leader is on the other side of the stone. It's longer than a school bus. We don't know how deep it is, but with estimates, they believe it's a certain, they have the measurements of how deep it is, and I've heard estimates of up to 650 tons that this stone weighs. And they would have brought that stone in from a quarry, set it into place, and it would have never moved. We don't have equipment to this day that can move that stone. We don't have equipment to this day that can move that stone, and engineers still don't know exactly how he put it there. This, again, is you are getting into the mindset and the thinking of who Herod the Great is. Here's another picture of it from the other side. It's just absolutely massive. There's a passage that I'll refer to you later when the Romans come through and destroy. I don't know if you remember this verse when Jesus says that not one stone will be left on top of one another. Well, the Romans actually come through and demolish the temple, but they get to this thing and they can't push it over. So what do? They just start chipping away at it. It's really archaeologically hilarious. In addition to the temple, you can kind of see the corner up there. Herod had his palace, which is right here in the far side of the city there. And here's that verse from John chapter 2. So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" 46 years to build that thing. And of course they're perplexed. What is Jesus must be nuts. And then of course the scriptures tell us he wasn't talking about this temple. He was talking about this temple. But you can see the imagery and how brilliant Jesus is using these buildings as illustrations and analogies for his life. And then this particular verse here from Mark chapter 13. As he was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what massive stones! Like that 650-ton stone that's 20 feet up in the air in the wall. What magnificent buildings! Do you see all these great buildings?" replied Jesus. "Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." Which, of course, is the prophecy of when the Romans come through. By the way, what's so brilliant about this is you can go there and you can actually see the prophecy coming true. These are the stones that were left over from 70 AD when the Romans came through and demolished the temple and the Temple Mount. Thrown down. Oh, did I pass it? Sorry. Thrown down, and you can see where the street was and how the street itself, because of the massive stones, were actually destroyed. That's the Temple Mount. Well, we need to move on with our building structures of Herod. We're going to go to a place called Masada, which is a fortress out into the middle of the desert. I don't know if you can see this. It's on the shore of the Dead Sea, which is at the lowest place on the face of the earth. This fortress out in the middle of the desert is over 23 acres in size with double walls surrounding the entire thing. There's no way that you can breach this. It's absolutely incredible. This is called a snake path, one of the ways in which you can get up. If you were to shore up your entire city, family, friends, council members, there's no way you're getting attacked upon. I mean, this place, how are you going to scale that thing? Well, the Romans eventually do. Palace is up at the top. You can see if you're going to try to capture this city, there's just no way you're going to do it from this side anyway. Just incredible. There's palaces out in the middle of the desert. Herod builds palaces with plastered walls, with hot baths, with cool baths, with atriums, with lounging places, with storehouses, which we're going to get to right here in a little bit. You can see the storehouses on the other side. Enough food to feed 1,000 people for 10 years that you can store in that place. Just in case you needed a place to hide. Up at the top, there were hanging palaces off the front. Again, painted, plastered, marbled. And why would you do this? Because I'm Herod and I can. That's why. And I'm great. And you know what? All these other kingdoms, Rome, Egypt, Persia, on them. Because if they need to come and get me, I'm just going here. And there's no way. There's no way you're getting me here. Absolutely no way. There's a western palace. He also has a freshwater swimming pool out here in the middle of the desert. There's the bathhouse that you can see. And some other ancient. Now, whenever you come to a place like this out in the middle of the desert, ask yourself the question, how are they going to get the water? Water is always the first question you ask in ancient archaeology. Very briefly, the number one source of fresh water out in the middle of the desert, where it doesn't rain but half an inch a year, if at all, is through flooding. Because what happens is rain falls several hundred miles away, falls onto the rock that cannot soak up the water. So geologically, the water just shelves right off of the rock and into little channels called wadis. And that water then comes rushing through the desert. And it might be no cloud in the sky, but it's raining right over there. That water comes rushing through and there's floods in the desert. Well, Herod, again, because of his brain and his ingenious and his ego and his Hellenism, he's all about himself and all of that, decides to rebuild the desert. He reconstructs the desert so that when those floods come down, they go into these cisterns in the side of Masada. And you can see several holes. There's 12 cisterns there, each one holding 1.44 million cubic feet of water. Again, enough water for 1,000 people for 10 years. And you can see inside a couple of them. Here's where the water would come in. These are broken into so we can see. And here we are at the bottom one. There's my wife and I. 1.44 million cubic feet of water. He rebuilds the desert, this guy. I mean, to think about what he does in order to make his grandeur and his rule and reign great, it's just kind of insane to think about. A couple other images of Masada. There's huge stories, and if you want to Google and take a look at the story behind Masada, there's amazing stories that happened at this place. The last building that I want to show you is a place called the Herodium, or the Herodium, depending upon how you pronounce it. This, perhaps, is one of the most, I loved being here and reading about this place. Take a look at the shape of the mountain out in the middle of the desert, once again in the Judean wilderness. You can see that the towers that were built on the four corners are the four ordinances, north, south, east, and west, with the largest one being on the east side. That's going to be important because astrology comes into play into the passage that I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 2. The tallest tower is from the east side. It's from the east that all good things come, which is why we have in our modern English the word orient. To orient yourself is to always have east being your first point of reference. Now, we don't have time to go through all of these things. Ancient historical records will tell us the same level of opulence at those other places I showed are the same that you would find here. A bathhouse, cisterns, you would find staircases made of marble, atriums. There's a garden there for food and supplies and all that kind of stuff. And I love this picture because it's an artist's rendition of what it may have looked like. Again, once again, out in the middle of the desert. Here's a picture. You can see colonnades. Colonnaded inside. Because if you're out in the middle of the desert, you want to be covered by the shade, so you can see that in there. Another picture of what it may have looked like. Another picture of the remains from the inside. Later, people came and built a synagogue where the gardens used to be. Now, the question that people ask all the time is, what is this and where did he get the dirt? Take a look at the shape of the Herodian in comparison to the other hills that surround Judea. It is noticeably taller than every other geological shape in this area. How did he do it? Well, you ready for this? After thinking through the possibilities, archaeologists have come to the conclusion that Herod the Great, the master craftsman and architect and builder, literally moved a mountain. One possibility is this one off to the side. I don't think that's it, but this is one of the possibilities, where he cut off a mountain on one side, moved all that dirt to the location of the Herodian and began to build it up so that his palace could stand above and beyond all of the geological figures in the Judean wilderness. He literally moved a mountain. Now, your question is, where did he get the mountain from? Answer, we don't know. It's not there anymore. Absolutely insane. Does anybody remember this verse? He replied, it's because you have so little faith. I tell you the truth, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Maybe what Jesus is referring to is an actual mountain that was moved. And he's using that as an illustration. That if Herod can do this, can you imagine what you can do with your faith? If Herod can literally do this, imagine what you can do with your faith. The Herodian, by the way, is barely 3 miles from Bethlehem and overlooks the city, and it's about 6 miles from Jerusalem. And it's, to this day, still a magnificent sight. I'm standing on the Mount of Olives, right next to the Temple Mount, in the heart of the city of Jerusalem. And I took this picture because I couldn't actually believe it. Like 6 miles away, poking up out of the middle of the desert, is the Herodian. You can actually see it from the Mount of Olives. If Jesus was doing his teaching from Matthew chapter 17 on the Mount of Olives, most definitely he could have seen that structure off in the distance. And again, just like the Temple Mount, just like Masada, just like Caesarea, just like other buildings that Herod built, it's all to proclaim one thing. I am king, I am ruler, and you are not. I'm the one in charge, I'm the one with the authority, I'm the one. It's all about me. And I want my name, my reputation, my kingdom, my prestige, my values, everything about me to move forward into history. And I'm going to put a mark on this world through these building projects. I'm going to put a mark on this world that declares my greatness, which is why today we call him Herod the Great. Here's a quick summary from a book. Oh, I don't have the underline there. Filled with enthusiasm for all things Roman, Herod brought Roman entertainment, Roman gods, and Roman concrete into his kingdom. At Caesarea, as at Masada, Herodian, and on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, he conceived designs of unsurpassed scale and boldness, Above all, pay attention to this. Above all, Herod meant to have his name among those of the great builders of the past, with Alexander and the Seleucids, with the fabulous kings who had devoted themselves since time began to founding and nurturing cities. Like them, he wanted a monument to ensure his fame, a great city that would flourish far into the future. That, essentially, was King Herod's dream. Do you hear that? Just like Alexander, just like other builders, I want my name to be great. I want my fame to go forward. I want a monument to ensure that nobody will ever forget how great I am. This is King Herod. And then we come to passages in Matthew and our scriptures that declare at the time of Caesar Augustus and at the time of King Herod. There's another one that has been born. And in the shadow of this, a small little baby from a pitiful little town in a sheepfold out in the middle of the field. Smoky, animal excrement all over the floor. No bathhouse, no freshwater swimming pool, no plastered walls, no paint, beautiful artistry, no marble from Italy. Only the sound of bleeding sheep. He sat in a stone trough, a watering trough for the animals. Another one's been born in this life. In the midst of all this greatness, Caesar Augustus, king, the worshipped one, in the midst of Herod the Great, who's making his name famous, who's killing everybody who's going to get in his way, we have one that says, someday unto us a child is going to be born. And the government is going to be on his shoulders. Not on Caesar, not on Herod, on his shoulders. And he's going to be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government and peace, there's going to be no end. He's going to reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, upholding and establishing it with justice and righteousness. Not fear, not ego, not oppression, not authoritarianism. Justice and righteousness. And the zeal of God is going to proclaim this. Now that you have a little bit of a glimpse of who Herod is, murderous reign, ego and pride, buildings to proclaim his fame, let's read this passage from Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, which we're like, ooh. Magi from the east, notice that again, from the east. That's really key because the Orient is where many of the ancients believed that truth, wisdom, and the gods would come from. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews?" Wait a second, been born King of the Jews? He's asking King Herod, who wants to ensure that nobody jacks up his kingdom. Hey, King Herod, where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Yeah, not you, him. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Which makes a lot more sense now. By the way, and so does this phrase, and all Jerusalem with him. Because if this is a guy that's going to ask his army to slaughter 1,000 people, prominent Jewish members of society, upon his death, to ensure that there's mourning in the land, if King Herod is disturbed, you betcha all of Jerusalem is disturbed as well. They're now concerned about what Herod's going to do. You guys know what Herod does. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. Oh, this makes so much sense, because this entire time under rule and reign of Rome and King Herod, who's essentially a puppet of Rome, we need somebody who's going to shepherd us, somebody who's going to care for us, somebody who's going to take care of the reality of our humanity, not just rule with oppression and slaughter. And then I love this verse, because this is just so ironic. Then Herod called the Magi secretly, found out from them the exact time the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem saying, hey, why don't you guys go make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Do you hear the sarcasm in that? Do you hear how he's just playing the game? And then this, because you know Herod's nuts in the brain. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. So the question for us is this. Let me go back to this slide as our picture. In the midst of all of this, real quickly, how many of you knew any of that about Herod? Any of it? A little bit. Some. Most of us don't know any of that. And yet he does this to ensure that his kingdom will never end, that his kingdom and his reign and his fame will continue on throughout all eternity. And the only reason why we know about King Herod's reign is because we have to go dig it up out of dirt. Next question. How many of you know the rule and the reign and the story of a little baby named Jesus? And of his kingdom, and of his rule, and of his reign. There will be no end. You don't have to go dig up the story of Jesus out of dirt. They gather together in community groups like this every week, or twice a week, or 3 times a week, or 4 times a week, depending on what church you're in. The kingdom of Jesus is living and ruling and reigning with righteousness and justice in Africa and in Europe and in Australia and in Asia. The kingdom of Jesus is ruling and reigning when those who are brokenhearted are bound up and encouraged, those who are in jail and in prison are visited and set free, those who are in poverty and who are suffering from injustice are freed. The rule and the reign of the kingdom of Jesus is still active and working and moving. And it's a beautiful, phenomenal, just from a historical perspective, incredible thing. That there are people who are following this little baby that was born, who just narrowly escaped death when Herod slaughters all those babies. There's one. His rule and his reign is still active to this day, 2,000 years later. So the question and the lesson for us and the sermon for this morning is ultimately this. Whose kingdom are you building? We have our own Herods, by the way. I like to say at the end of presentations like this, Donald Trump. Does anybody know who Donald Trump is? Donald Trump owns an outhouse compared to Herod. Donald Trump doesn't own anything compared to Herod. We have our own king. You know that sheikh in Saudi Arabia who's building up some of the most phenomenal buildings and recrafting the oceans? Yeah, we have our own Herods even to this day. We have our own Herods even in this room, I bet, building up our own monuments to our own selves. And we do it in subtle ways. By the things we say, by the things we do, by the things we purchase, by the things that we are all about, by the things we invest in. We build up our own kingdoms as well. So the question for us this morning is, whose kingdom are you building? Whose kingdom are you building? Because King Herod is not an anomaly in history. We know that this happens, and again, it happens today. People building for their own fame, building for their own pride, building for their own prestige and authority and rule and reign. And I want to make my name great. Let's plaster it on a poster. Let's put it up on TV. Let's make my name great. And that can be done through all sorts of different means today in our culture. Whose kingdom are you building? Or are we building the rule and the reign of Jesus, who reigns with peace and righteousness and justice, and who started a revolutionary movement of laying down one's life so that you could be a servant? Started a revolution of not just loving people who love you, because even pagans do that. We started a revolution of loving even your enemy and praying for those who persecute you. We started a revolution that transformed the entire world. Not through buildings. Jesus didn't build one single thing. I know Passion of the Christ, he built a table. Okay? He built a table in that movie. But Jesus didn't build anything, he didn't write anything, and yet his kingdom and his rule and his reign continues on even to this day. So my question for you and for us this morning is, whose kingdom are you building? And I would encourage you and challenge you to think and to consider that if there's time and money and energy and effort that's being put into building a kingdom other than the kingdom of Jesus, churches like this and services like this are a great place to just lay down your heart and say, okay, God, I've been building the wrong kingdom. Help me to shift my priorities, my time, my talents, my treasures, so I can be building your kingdom instead. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this morning and for this group of people that gather so faithfully. It's a joy to be with them. It's a joy to learn from you and about you. And I pray this morning that we truly would lay down our hearts, our ambitions. We would lay down any endeavors that we have that are really building our kingdom rather than building yours. And help us to be on a journey and a path of learning more and more what it means to build your kingdom. And ultimately, God, may we submit our hearts and our will. May we never be caught up in our own ego or our own pride, but may we lay down our lives as you have taught us for the sake of you, your name. And as you have taught us to pray, may your kingdom come. May your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven.